Welcome to another episode of the Wealthy Podcast. I'm Shauna Nairos, and today we are talking with Kristy Hodgins, who is a registered dietitian. This podcast episode is one you are not going to want to miss. Everybody has an interest in good diet and nutrition because it impacts all areas of our health. Kristy talks about diet trends. She talks about all different kinds of ways that we can use food and nutrition to impact our health. And most importantly, we talk about how you can use your nutrition to prevent chronic diseases like diabetes. Listen up. This is a conversation that I have been so looking forward to having. Today we have Kristy Hodgins on the Wealthy Podcast, and Kristy is a registered dietitian. She is the Wellness Dietician. She has over 13 years of nutrition experience working in a variety of areas, including acute care, diabetes, weight management, disordered eating, gastrointestinal health, and oncology. She's always been fascinated by the connection between our diet and health. And so Kristy and I are going to together unpack some of my biggest questions about how our diet and nutrition can impact our health. And some really great tips and takeaways, I think, for those of you that are really interested in how you can use food and nutrition to really amplify your well-being. So welcome, Kristy.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you.
This is Kristy's, can I tell? It's your first podcast.
It is my first podcast.
I know, you're going to kill it. I just know it. I know it. So we start with an opening tradition on the Wealthy Podcast. Literally just, trying to give people the opportunity to share why and how their passion for health began. So can you recall or share with us the first moment when healthcare or health significantly affected your life or that of someone close to you? Kind of when you understood that being healthy is wealth.
I think for me, I'm very lucky that my family hasn't been affected by much. So I haven't had any detrimental incidences that led me into health. But I think from a young age, I was always very active in sports. And so I learned from a young age that what I'm putting in my body is fueling me to be better, to be more competitive. And that just kind of stuck with me as I was going through my adolescent and teen years. And then as an adult, entering into healthcare, obviously I've been plagued with meeting clients and patients who, are not so lucky or they're in times of illness when I'm meeting them. So just utilizing nutrition to help them recover from, maybe illness or surgery or whatever disease that it may be. But personally, I've been quite blessed, I guess I would say, that I've remained healthy. And so my introduction of nutrition and health has been on a preventative front for myself and my family.
That's a great way to come to it. I think a lot of us sometimes find our first entry point into a passion for healthcare because of a not so great situation or a crisis or somebody that we love has become sick. And then all of a sudden we become interested in healthcare, but coming at it from a different perspective, how can nutrition actually amplify? So did you play sports as a young person?
Yeah. Basically, I think I started skiing when I was 2, being leashed to my dad in the mountains. I played softball, slow pitch, as older, but softball basically from when I was 5 up until high school. I played provincial volleyball, basketball.
Wow.
So I was very, very active, and I've continued that into my adult life as well. And I think too, in my practice, I very much work in that preventative realm. So I think it's all kind of come full circle. Basically, I knew when I was little that if I ate good, I performed better.
Really great awareness. I have 2 athletic teenagers, and we try to make healthy choices. but sometimes
it's not always perfect.
Pizza and I won't say pop. They don't drink pop, but they definitely, pizza and cereal. Cereal is just like a staple.
The go-to.
Yeah. I was like, okay. So I've read your Google reviews. You are literally changing people's lives. If you were to describe your mission in life, such as it is professionally, what would it be?
Oh, that's a great question. I think from a professional standpoint, I just want to empower, educate people to make good choices. That's a big thing of my practice, is putting the knowledge and education into their hands so they can go away with making great choices and being able to be kind of like self-sufficient and self-sustaining later on. I think that's really important. And again, just on that preventative front, if I can help somebody now prevent illness 5-10 years later, that's a big win. That's the goal.
I'm super excited to talk about that. I just kind of want to get into the mechanics of it, because we hear a lot about nutritionists versus registered dietitian. Like, what's the difference?
That's a great question. There's a lot of times the terms are used interchangeably. Yes. And so a registered dietitian is like a licensed title. And so only people who have gone through the schooling and the credentials to become a dietitian can use that term. And so provincially, it's licensed across Canada. Nutritionist is also a protected term in some provinces, not specifically in British Columbia, whereas nutritionist, anybody can call themselves a nutritionist. Some dietitians will put that terminology into their professional title or practice, but it can be someone who took, an hour course, a weekend course. And so if you're looking for somebody to work with in a professional manner, that might be more medical nutrition therapy. That's more in a dietitian's scope, where the scope of a nutritionist would be much more limited. They can't be giving advice on health conditions or treatment for that. And so your registered dietitian, like for myself, I did some undergraduate work. I did my Bachelor of Science in Nutrition. I did a 1-year internship, a national licensing exam. And then every year I have to be doing continuing education and relicensing within the province of BC.
Amazing. And I'm grateful to you for providing that distinction, because I think that food definitely is medicine, but it's really important to access the level of expertise that you need. Yeah. If it's more complicated, or if you just really, somebody like me, I just really appreciate sort of that bigger scope of understanding around health, that maybe the better fit would be a registered dietitian.
Yeah, it's really important to gauge that too, and like that education and like reputable and credible sources for your nutrition information. There's so much nutrition information.
I mean, Google
everywhere.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
TikTok, social media, anything you want, someone is telling you about nutrition. And so it really is. A dietitian can help you decipher what's wrong, what's right.
Yeah.
The other benefit of a registered dietitian is where you can be covered under your extended health benefits.
Oh.
So if you have extended health benefits, you may have registered dietitian coverage. So you can go and see a dietitian, have that appointment covered. And
that's
amazing.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So just like your massage
look
therapy, chiropractor,
Yeah.
physiotherapist, all of that.
That's awesome. Yeah. I think one of the most brilliant slogans I've ever heard, I'm a marketer, communications and marketing is my jam. When it comes to diet, one of the most brilliant slogans I've ever heard is like, you are what you eat. Why is what we eat so important? And what areas of our health are impacted by what we eat?
Oh my gosh, so much.
It's like a one word, I like everything.
Yeah, done. I mean, it really is like think of when you eat really well, how you feel, even your like outward demeanor. You feel good, you look good. And that's not just like on a surface level. That's like feeding your gut really healthily. And that's really your like blueprint for your entire system. And so when that's happy, everything else is running good. If we're eating balanced, proper diets, that can help prevent chronic disease, illness, help you recover from illness a lot quicker. So it really has a big impact if we eat a lot of, added refined sugar, simple carbohydrates, not getting enough fiber, enough protein. We feel that. We don't feel our best. And so when we're, eating those good, healthy foods, we feel good, we perform well, we have mental clarity, we're a lot better in our jobs, our personal lives. It kind of runs the gamut.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, what would you like? I was thinking about these questions, and I was diagnosed with breast cancer 5 years ago. And since then, I've really sort of gotten a lot more curious about diet. And I thought actually before that I ate pretty well. And then I realized, oh, wow, I don't really know much about what a healthy diet versus a not so healthy diet is. What would you say? I like to stay optimistic, but in this case, I'm going to ask you the question, what is a poor diet?
I guess it depends on what the situation is. If we're talking, general
Yeah, just generally, yes.
A poor diet, to me, what I'm looking for in a consult with a client is, are meals balanced? Do they contain, all of our macronutrients? And those are our big nutrients that provide our body energy, as opposed to like micronutrients, which are our vitamins and minerals.
So what's an example of macronutrients?
So our macronutrients are our carbohydrates, our proteins, and our fats.
Okay.
And so I love to go through, say, like a diet history with somebody and look to see, is there adequacy of those at our meals? And then beyond that, are they in good proportion? And so we know there's, certain balances of those that meet our dietary needs. And so often I'm looking to see, are you getting enough protein in your diet? Are you getting enough fiber to help keep you full longer? Are you getting enough fiber for good digestive health, colon health? And so if we look to a not so balanced diet, or maybe not the best diet, oftentimes those will be inconsistency with meals, so a longer time period between meals. Maybe not balanced, maybe relying more on high carbohydrate versus adding protein in to keep us feeling more satiated. Looking for like added refined sugars, right?
Like, what is that? Like,
so think like white sugar, simple syrups.
So like pop.
Yeah, pop, candy, pastries, things like that. Like if we're tending to try and fill up on that, we're going to get some quick energy, but we're going to be hungry quite quickly after. And we're going to repeat that cycle. Whereas if we can relay that to be a little bit more healthful, like what can we add to your current diet? Can we add a little bit of fiber? If you come in and tell me, I only like white bread. Okay, can we add fiber to that meal that you're having white bread with instead? It doesn't have to be that the fiber is specifically in that one food. Let's add some berries to that meal. Let's add some protein to that meal. So I think, in short, what an unhealthy diet might look like is, like lacking fiber, lacking protein, focusing on more quick, simple like carbohydrates
ultra
that
processed.
Yeah. And even like with processed, like all of our foods are processed in some capacity. It's really when you break down the definition of processing, right? So if anything has been taken from its original form, it's processed. So not to say processed foods are bad, but when we think of processed, we think of like packaged foods, a lot of preservatives in those foods, things like that. But I think, just trying to, I guess, like alter the current diet to add more healthful things in. But those are the type of things that I'm usually looking for.
So what, I think you kind of touched on this like in your intro. If you could like provide one tip, one piece of universal advice, one thing that just the regular average Joe or Joanna could add or eliminate from their diet, what would it be? Or like just pay attention to?
Yeah, fair question. I will put a caveat that like everyone is so individual, but for a general healthy person who they don't have any known illness, disease, anything that they're, kind of fighting against, I think fiber. Our diets.
Like add fiber.
Yeah, adding fiber into the diet. So we're talking general population, you may have other like specifics personally, but for women, aiming for like 25 grams of fiber per day. For men, 38 grams of fiber.
And what are like, how do I get that much fiber?
Lots of fruits and vegetables.
Okay.
So our fruits and vegetables are fiber sources. Our whole grains, when we say whole grain, it literally means that it's using the whole physical grain when producing that food. So think breads, pastas, things like that in our carbohydrates where we're getting that fiber component. So if we take the difference between white bread and 100% whole wheat bread. The white bread has just stripped some of that grain away that has removed the fiber to produce that product, whereas 100% whole wheat bread would utilize that entire grain. So you're getting the fiber.
I see.
So, and I mean, with a low fiber diet, you're at more risk of developing diseases. So higher fiber diets can help with diabetes, help in prevention of diabetes, help in digestive tract disorders, colon cancer. So it really runs the gamut. So I think if I was pinpointing one thing, it definitely would be fiber.
Okay. So eat your fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, always.
Yes. I like berries. That's my thing.
High fiber.
Yes. Yeah. Blueberries are like my favorite.
Yeah.
I have more questions about fiber in regards to elimination, but we can maybe get to that in a bit.
I talk about fiber a lot.
It's an area of curiosity for me. Let's just say that. Okay, talk to me. So one of the biggest, one of the amazing things about this conversation is like everybody has an interest in it because we all eat, right? And if you're somebody that pays attention to kind of like the media and the discussions about nutrition, the big bad guy right now is sugar. It's a bad guy. So people are buying like these glucose monitors, they're pricking their fingers, they're testing their blood to see what their glucose levels are. They're worrying about these spikes. It's just like sugar has become the latest villain in the wellness industry. And I just wanted to ask you, is this a real cause for concern, or is this just sort of like the villain du jour?
Yeah, the latter. I would say, like, unless you have some sort of glucose imbalance, so we're talking diabetes, basically type 1, type 2 diabetes, where you are actually struggling with hyperglycemia, so elevated blood glucose levels, it's not really necessary for the regular person to be testing their blood sugar levels. With those monitors, it also depends on when are you doing a reading? Are you educated on using those monitors as well, right? It's completely normal for our blood sugar to rise after we eat a meal. It will rise differently depending on the composition of that meal. So if you had a meal that lacked protein and fiber, so think you ate a big bowl of pasta with cream sauce, your blood sugar is going to spike higher than if you ate that same meal, but you loaded it up with vegetables and maybe you put a source of protein in it, which will help to reduce that spike in blood sugar. And so it really becomes, when those type of tools come into the hands of people who might not necessarily know the background of what it's actually reading to you.
And like what to do with the information.
Yeah. That's the other thing. What are you doing with that information? If you see your blood sugar is, reaching 10 or 11 post-meal, well, that's normal. And if you get in your head about it, what are you doing? Are you then looking at altering the meal, restricting eating less? And so it can kind of cause a negative kind of domino effect, actually. But for the general population, no, not needed. you're better off, if you're getting blood work done from your doctor, is having your random glucose tested, having a hemoglobin A1C tested, which is like a 3-month marker of what your average blood glucose has been. And so those are our definitive measures of diagnosing diabetes from like a physician's standpoint. And so for general population, no, like not needed.
Okay.
Yeah.
That being said, I mean, you mentioned diabetes and, you know, there's a whole lot of great topics within diabetes, but one of the kind of most staggering statistics that I've come across is, and we know this just from working in acute care, diabetes is on the rise. So type 2 diabetes. According to the most recent data I could find from Diabetes Canada, the cost of treating diabetes in our country has soared from $14 billion in 2008 to just under $30 billion in 2019. That's just the most recent data I could find. I'm sure it's probably grown even since then. That was 5 years ago. In 2021, nearly 10% of Canadians, or 3.7 million people, are living with type 2 diabetes. So why is this happening? Why this giant surge in folks being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, which from my understanding is largely preventable?
Right. Yeah. Those are alarming stats, especially like the volume of people getting it. And yeah, it's a preventable disease.
Yes.
But I think like our lifestyles have become more prone to be like more sedentary. So if you think you're working a desk job 9 to 5, you're not having movement. You know, we're not educated on proper nutrition and the rising cost of food. Even, right? So that can be a barrier for some people of making healthier choices. And so we are relying on those quick convenience foods that might not be providing, I'm like a broken record, might not be providing enough fiber, might not be providing
fiber. Get your fiber, folks.
Always the fiber. Might not be getting enough protein in. And so we're also in this like overweight obesity epidemic as well. And so all of these things are kind of making the like sensitization of our cells a little bit more resistant to insulin. And so that can be happening with people. And I think overall it is lifestyle. We're as a whole eating more and maybe not the right foods, moving less for like a large amount of population. And so those type of things like, and it can be simple. You might be taking a 20-minute walk on your lunch break. That can be really helpful and beneficial to help kind of sensitize the cells after meals for good insulin uptake.
Interesting. Yeah. So just going for a walk after you eat will help kind of with the metabolizing of the meal?
It really helps for, I work with this, if I have somebody coming in for help with diabetes or helping to better their blood sugar control, something as simple as that. And if we're not even, you know, necessarily changing the composition of that meal, going for a 10, 20-minute walk after a meal, if able-bodied and able to do that, can help to make your cells more sensitive to get better uptake of insulin. And insulin is what is being released from the pancreas after we've eaten. And its whole job is to take blood glucose, blood sugar, out of the bloodstream and into the cells. So into the cells of our body, in our muscles, our liver, which is then utilizing those for energy.
So what is insulin resistance? Because this is a term also I think that is coming up a little more commonly in conversation, particularly with regards to like metabolic disorder like diabetes. Right. What is insulin resistance and what's the role that it plays in diabetes?
So basically, I guess on like a pretty simplified front, insulin resistance is basically the resistance of insulin to take the sugar from the bloodstream to the cells. So after we eat, anything that we're eating is being broken down and processed into simple sugar, so into the simplest form of the foods. And so then we need the insulin to be released from the pancreas to take upon that sugar up to the cells. And so in insulin resistance.
So that it can use that for energy.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so in insulin resistance, think of a little bit of like a wall. The insulin is fighting against that. So it's not appropriately taking the blood sugar to the cells. And so when this happens, our blood sugar is staying in the bloodstream. Mm-hmm. So we're getting that higher reading. Insulin is still being produced and released from the pancreas, so from those beta cells. And so we're getting a bit of an overproduction of insulin to try and get that blood sugar lowered, to take the sugar up to the cells. And so in insulin resistance, we're hitting a bit of that wall. And so that can lead to diagnosis of diabetes, because when you're getting your hemoglobin A1C tested every 3 months or a random glucose reading and that number is elevated, it's showing that pattern that has been elevated over and over. And so that there is a resistance there. Mm-hmm. And so that can lead to diagnosis of diabetes. It can also be kind of a symptom of something called PCOS as well, that some women struggle with, where there's some insulin resistance as well. And so, yeah, in the simplest manner, it really is the resistance of the insulin taking the sugar to the cells that we're utilizing for energy.
And one of the ways, and totally correct me if I'm wrong, mm-hmm. because I'm literally an armchair dietitian without all the education, just the Google. One of the ways that insulin resistance articulates, like how you would know perhaps maybe that you have it, is weight gain and just like reduced sort of like mental clarity. Is that sort of like a primary indicator? I mean, I know those things can be caused by other things, but if you do have insulin resistance and are at risk for diabetes, how might you know this?
Yeah, I think you can see like weight gain, or it might be more prevalent in people who are overweight or obese, oftentimes presenting as that like central adiposity, so around our waistlines.
Okay, so like the pot belly.
Yeah, a little bit.
What did you call it? Central adiposity?
Central adiposity.
Also known as pot belly.
And so, yeah, like overweight, because and then with, you mentioned like mental clarity or maybe more fatigue or low energy, because when we're eating and we're getting that breakdown of our foods into the simplest form, into sugar, that's what's giving us energy. That's our preferred brain's fuel, is glucose. And so if it's not adequately getting out of our bloodstream into the cells where it's needed, we'll get this effect of feeling more fatigue, feeling a bit lethargic, not having that clarity or energy that we would normally have after a meal.
Interesting. So interesting. Okay. So proactively, because you said that's like your mission in life, is like, how can we adapt our diets to help regulate insulin so that we don't face this problem of insulin resistance, and all of the things that go along with a pre-diabetic or diabetic diagnosis?
Yeah, I think really working on that like healthful, balanced diet. And so consistency and timing of meals, not going too long between meals. So we have a bit of like a steady stream of energy coming in, that instead of eating, one big large meal where the body kind of has to work in overdrive to get enough insulin released, get that blood sugar up to the cells, whereas eating, a few smaller meals a day, maybe putting some snacks in between, we're able to have a bit more balance. And so again, that's the carbohydrate, the protein, a bit of fat,
fiber.
Focusing on the fiber. We know each other well already. That really helps. And living an active lifestyle. And that doesn't mean you have to be hitting the gym 5 days a week.
Like it's the walk after dinner kind of thing.
Get some steps in to help to get those cells a little bit more sensitive. Yeah.
Okay. So this is like, I don't even know if this is a thing, but I'm going to ask you. I read somewhere that if you eat like fiber or like spinach is my thing, right? Like something green and just like healthy, veggie, maybe some berries, but they have sugar in them. But anyway, if you eat that before you eat the rest of your meal, like, so if like I eat just a little bit of spinach and then I go ahead and have like my toast with peanut butter or whatever, that helps kind of like keep the spike low. Is that like a thing?
You know what? I've actually been hearing about that a little bit more lately. I don't know all of the like evidence and data on it, but I think like we just make things way too complicated, you know? I think it's more important to like have the fiber with the meal.
Okay.
And
so as long as you're having it.
Yeah, having it within the meal, because that is going to help to have a bit of a reduction in blood sugar spike. And so instead of that blood sugar going up to, 13, 14 after a meal, we might have that going up to 10 or 11 with the inclusion of fiber. So it's not necessarily like the timing of the fiber intake compared to the rest of the meal. In some situations, that can be a strategy utilized, maybe specifically like in weight loss, because some of our high fiber foods, like fruits and vegetables specifically, you can eat a higher volume of those.
Right.
They're high in fiber. They're a bit lower in calorie than the rest of our meal. So that can be a strategy to kind of help fill you up a bit. So potentially you're eating a little bit less at that meal, if that is something that you're working on or you need to be working on. Yeah.
Well, that's actually a really great transition, because I don't know. I like there's so much out there with regards to weight loss. Like a lot of people, I mean, not everybody is like, oh, I want to lose 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 pounds. But a lot of people are very concerned about, weight loss. It's always kind of top of the list for goals usually when it comes to health. Yeah. So, and it's so confusing because there's so many kind of conflicting, I don't know if you call them fad diets out there. There's like keto and carnivore and vegan and vegetarian and intermittent fasting or time delayed eating. And, what do you make of all this? Where do we start? Like if we're trying to maintain optimal health as the goal, where do we start with all of this weight loss stuff?
I mean, in the simplest form, weight loss is you need to be in a bit of a calorie deficit. You need to be eating less than what your body is needing, right? And so we need to, if your body needs or is using 2,000 calories and that's maintaining your weight, you need to eat a little bit below that. But we can't become quite restrictive because your body will downregulate and kind of work at a slower pace. Yeah. I think with like all the diets out there, my question to people when they come to me is always, is this long-term for you? Will you start this and continue this forever? If not, what are you going to do when you come off of it? And also just the side effects of some of them. So the keto diet has become so popular, but are we thinking about heart health and cardiovascular health with having so much fat in the diet? I think anytime we're restricting or cutting out, a food group or multiple food groups for kind of weight loss or maybe like aesthetic purposes, not usually the right way to go and not sustainable. So I really work in the sustainable kind of like making habits. And so you can have longevity with what you're doing and making it more lifestyle than diet. Some people really push for the desire to want to do intermittent fasting. I mean, personally for me, I'm starving in the morning. I cannot force myself to wait till, 11 a.m., 12 o'clock until my first meal. And if you're similar to that, then it's likely not for you.
Right. Because it's not sustainable.
Yeah. And so for some people it is, and that's totally fine. It can be a tool or a strategy where you're eating in a shorter window of time, and maybe that allows you to be in a bit of a calorie deficit, consume less calories overall in your day, but it's definitely not for everybody. But I mean, there's been so many fad diets, they come and go. People will get results with them, like people will get results with keto. But when you go off keto, what's happening, right? When you're reintroducing food. And so I would rather start from an education perspective and get people on a good plan that they can then do forever, right? Because becomes their lifestyle.
Yeah, I love that you start there because the sustainability piece is, I think, key to the success of any kind of, I don't want to call it a diet, but like way of eating.
Yeah.
My husband did keto and he did have really good results, but a couple years later, all of the weight had been gained back. But now he has this like, oh, back when I did keto, back in the keto days, but it really wasn't sustainable.
No.
And so the two of us have now been, and we can talk a little bit about how things change when you get into sort of, let's call it the middle years time of life, where we're trying to set goals that are more reasonable. And a huge part of that is time.
Yeah.
So, because, things like keto or like going like intermittent fasting or whatever sometimes can yield results very quickly, but may not be sustainable. What's more reasonable? Like in terms of weight loss goals, like I literally would set a goal of like 1 pound a month. Like, is that too low?
I think
it basically allows me to keep drinking wine and eating chips.
I mean, I think it depends on what your goals are, right?
Okay.
And or what your needs are. If it's not medically directed weight loss.
Yeah.
I think really weight loss of like 1 to 2 pounds a week is what's considered safe.
Okay.
Beyond that, we run into complications of potentially muscle loss.
Right.
And so we don't want that. If we're in a calorie deficit, we can lose weight, but it might be at the result of muscle loss. And so there's other strategies that we want to do with including like strength training in that. So we're not breaking down that muscle for energy for the body. But I mean, yeah, a slow, healthy weight loss is much more sustainable. Everybody's going to be different. Everyone's starting from a different point, right? Someone who has much more weight to lose will likely lose weight more rapidly at the beginning of their journey,
right? Versus
someone who's trying to get off the, pesky last like 5 to 10 pounds, which is really difficult. And so it really is individualized and it's a balance, right? Do you want to be
hungry?
Do you want to be like changed to a specific diet that you're maybe not happy on? It's, impacting your life. And with the time that it takes into things too is strategizing what works for you, right? What works for your neighbor might not be what's best for you. And so again, that's seeing a dietitian, having that individualized consult. We're the ones who are going to go through that information and know kind of what is going to work for you, what's needed for you. Because, your friend, your neighbor, your colleague, they might have other health conditions that are causing weight loss unintentionally or making them more resistant to weight loss as well. Like, so on either side of it. And so it's all so individual.
I love that you say that too, because it isn't one size fits all.
No, definitely
right.
not.
And sometimes when, it's, just before bed and you're scrolling through the TikToks and the reels on the Instagram and you're like, there's this like trend of like, the really people that I would probably be considered overweight, no information on their health status whatsoever, but then they do this massive transformation and it's like, whoa, I think that sometimes we forget that just because it works for somebody doesn't mean it works for us.
Exactly.
And it really does need to be personalized.
And what time do you have to put into it, right? And oftentimes those things, I mean, I catch myself looking at those too. Like, oh my gosh, what did they do?
Yeah.
And oftentimes the comments on those are, drop your workout routine. What are you doing? And workout, obviously exercise is super important.
Right.
But diet is the biggest proportion of that too. And so, you know, you can't out-exercise a bad diet.
I love that saying.
Yeah.
I
You
like
just
it's
can't.
so true.
Yeah. The like whole abs are made in the kitchen. Yes, our abs are a muscle. We're working those in the gym. But the whole saying is basically a fat loss, right? So we all have abs. We all have abdominal muscles. Some of them are just covered in a little fat. And for women, that's normal, right? Like we have fat on our abdominal to protect our reproductive organs and things. So also, I mean, Photoshop, what you're seeing online isn't always accurate too.
No, it's not. I think we all should just delete it.
We would have much more time for like better
Go for a walk
eating
instead. Eat some fiber.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, you sort of mentioned, you know, inhibitors of weight loss. My poor husband, I bring him up all the time on this. But he would say this, he has terrible sleep hygiene, right? And so like I think this is why he has trouble losing that kind of last 10 pounds. But how important is, you know, you talk about diet, you talk about exercise, how important is sleep?
Super important.
Okay.
Yeah. And like having good sleep, right? So being in the proper sleep cycles as well is really important. Like having that good, like long sleep too, like of those cycles. I mean, I'm not a sleep expert.
We had a sleep expert on.
Oh, you did?
Great. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. So you can go find that episode if you're curious about sleep. Yeah. Yeah.
But it does, because you think when you have a bad sleep, you're kind of dragging the next day. Your mental clarity's not there. We're not really putting the time into prep like a nice protein-rich omelet with vegetables and fruit or a smoothie.
You just kind of want to eat.
You're like caffeinating, having some toast. So you likely make worse food choices as well. And I mean, there's more science behind it as to
just like what hormones.
Exactly. Yeah. Like everything that else is going into it. But looking solely from a nutrition perspective, I always think if I get a bad sleep, I'm not really motivated to cook really good meals or put more time into that. You know, I'm tired that day. That might be takeout day. That might be quick, whatever's in the pantry type day. And so that plays a role too of just like when we're sleeping well, we're resting. We're actually, our body's recovering and repairing overnight. That's the whole purpose of us sleeping. And so when we're not able to do that, we might not be the best at justifying our decisions that we're making when it's related to nutrition as well. Yeah,
for sure. Okay, so I am in a phase of life where what did you call it? Central adiposity struggle is real.
The fancy term.
Fancy term for belly fat. Like you sort of touched on it there, but like how do hormone fluctuations impact weight gain or weight loss? And are there things that we can do nutritionally with our diets to help just sort of facilitate ease through the transition?
Right. This is actually, I was just talking to my husband the other night of how often this has come up for me in the last 6 months, like a big influx of clients with these like same type of complaints. I mean, when you think of hormones between men and women, we have the same hormones, right? Where we have testosterone, we have estrogen. And so men have higher testosterone, lower estrogen. They're very balanced day to day, week to week, whereas women, our hormones are not, right? For reproductive purposes. But when we're hitting that, you know, kind of perimenopause into menopause phase, our estrogen reduces like slightly, right? And so that can have an effect on lowering of the metabolic rate. So your metabolism, how much calories you're burning off. But I think there's too much emphasis put on that. And you have to think of how is your lifestyle change, right? Compared to when you were 20, 30 versus 45. And so, you know, there could be less movement, less unintentional activity, right? Like less steps in the day. Maybe you don't have as much time. Maybe your kids are
maybe you have
old.
a sore knee, so you just don't park as far away from work.
You're taking time off of activities that you used to be very readily involved in doing. And so that can be a big part of it. Obviously, there are things that we can do nutritionally because we're looking at assessments. What is your lifestyle? How has that changed from, say, 2 years ago, if that's where you started noticing maybe a gradual increase in weight or an increase in fat mass? And so we can look at kind of strategizing. What can we do with that? And again, it's consistency of those meals. Maybe it's more kind of small, frequent meals. So we're getting a consistent kind of influx of energy coming in, which can really help with allowing us to feel more satiated consistently through the day, where we're not hitting those peaks where we're like ravenous, right? We're craving anything. We're usually not craving an apple. To be fair, we're craving crackers, cookies, pastries, sweets, things like that are going to bring our blood sugar up. And so I always often talk about like the 3 p.m. wall. For like a desk job, oftentimes you're getting bored, maybe around 2:30, 3 o'clock. You're a little less focused. You're not concentrating as much. It's a reduction in blood glucose, right? So it's been a few hours since you had lunch and your body needs something. So if we haven't intentionally planned for that, we're often going to choose things that may not be the best for us. Higher calorie, higher sugar, not much fiber, not much protein. And so looking at the diet overall and intentionally planning out your day for your needs, that will really allow strategically to potentially get into a bit of a calorie deficit. If you're focusing on, again, fiber, focusing on protein, that keeps you full longer. You're not going to be, always thinking about, okay, when's my next snack coming? What am I eating next? It keeps you feeling more satiated through the day, and that can be a really helpful strategy in that. Sometimes it really is just, I shouldn't say overhauling the diet because I usually don't do that. I'm very much nutrition by addition. What can we add into the diet that might end up displacing something that is not so good for you, but not restricting that out of the diet? And so really having somebody like a dietitian look at your diet, look at your lifestyle. What's your activity levels like? Are you getting enough protein? Are you getting enough fat to support hormone health as well in your diet? And so it's a whole gamut of things. We could do like an entire conversation on it.
Totally. Yeah. And I'm curious. There's so many things I could ask you. I want to talk about protein and for many women, I imagine men too, like maintaining muscle mass as we age. We're learning more and more science is coming out that it's so important to maintain muscle mass as we age for longevity. How can we do that using nutrition?
Yeah. So,
because I mean, obviously, strength training and weights and fitness and all that, but nutrition wise, how do we support that, maintaining of muscle mass and even bone density, let's say, also is a concern, especially for women.
Yeah. And so even utilizing this with your last question too, of like aging into that perimenopausal phase with hormones, strength training is one of the best things women can do. So not only women, like throughout our whole lifespan, but it becomes even more important in those kind of like formative years of, premenopause, perimenopause, because that helps. Like, we want lean body mass. We want that muscle mass. That's helping to increase our metabolism. So that metabolic rate, how much calories we're burning off just to exist. So our lungs to function, our heart to function, our digestive system to work, all of those things is fueled by what our metabolism is. That's in short kind of the definition of that. And so allowing more strength training if you're able to, it doesn't mean you have to be, hitting a
squat rack.
Yeah, like an intimidating gym or anything, just like getting some sort of resistance. If that's bands, if that's low weights, and slowly building your way up for that. And for bone density, it's super important to be able to do that. And then from a nutrition front, it's protein. And so our protein needs differ through like lifespans. And so even when adults are hitting 65, their baseline protein needs are increasing from when they were, 64.
Right. It's that magical birthday. All of a sudden, double your protein intake.
And so it's a slight increase, but it is really important. And I think like a strategy is ensuring that you're having protein at every meal. A lot of times that's not happening. I'll talk to people and say, well, how much protein? Oh, I need 30 grams. Oh, is that a day? It's like, oh, we should be aiming for that per meal, obviously depending on like your lifestyle, your weight, all of that. But as a general rule of thumb, we should be aiming for those higher protein amounts because that
it's like 30 grams is a good sort of baseline.
Yeah, it can be. Like I oftentimes, like if I'm not doing anything where I'm specifically calculating out, you know, your exact macronutrients, your exact nutrition to a T for you, but a good baseline, try and have 25 to 30 grams of protein at breakfast. Our protein is really helping with our repair and our recovery of our muscles. It's allowing us to build muscle when we're doing strength training as well. And so it is really important in that. And I mean, as we age, often appetite changes, right, as well. So into like older adult years, when our appetite reduces and we're maybe not eating as much, it's easy for our body to break down muscle and use that as an energy source. Yeah. And so that's when protein becomes really important. Even in, you know, my history of like working in acute care in the hospital, that is when protein is so important. So you can lose 1.5 pounds of muscle for every 3 days that you're bedridden.
Wow.
And so I have history of working in an ICU. And so those patients are in those beds, right? And so as a dietitian, we're ensuring very high protein intakes for that to prevent that loss. For a healthy individual, again, it's ensuring an easy strategy is know your protein foods. What do you like?
Yeah, like what would you say are good sources of protein?
Yeah, so any of our, when we look at what contains protein, it's our animal proteins. And so think chicken, so our poultries, our meats, our eggs, our seafoods.
Beef.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Our dairy products. So there's also lots of like dairy alternatives too. So something like a soy-based is going to have protein in it. And then we have our plant-based proteins. So think of tofu, tempeh, beans, lentils, chickpeas, all of those things. So trying to include a variety of things at all of your meals and all of your snacks is a way that you don't really need to like count your protein intake and know, have I gotten, you know, X amount of grams today?
Yeah.
But I've included protein at each meal or each snack. So as simple as, you know, if you're a toast and coffee drinker in the morning, maybe do a little yogurt cup with that, you know, a little bit of Greek yogurt with some berries. So you've added protein and fiber to that.
Yes.
Have a little background noise.
Love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Very interesting. What is your position on meat? And I asked this just because like I would call myself like vegetarian curious. I've kind of flirted with being a vegetarian over the years. I always feel really good when I am, but then I always sort of migrate back to consuming animal proteins because I feel like I might not be getting enough protein on a vegetarian diet. But then I've also read that, you know, sometimes consuming a lot of animal protein can be inflammatory. So like, what's your thoughts on all of that?
I mean, all of our evidence and research really gears towards more plant-forward diets, plant-based diets. And for me, if someone says, you know, I eat plant-based, that doesn't mean you have to eat 100% plant-based. Sorry. You know, I consider that I mainly eat plant-based, but I will include some animal proteins in my diet, you know, the odd chicken or ground beef or something like that along those lines. I think it's a lack of education. And so when people say, well, vegetarian diet, you know, often they're not replacing what they've left out of their diet. So if they've swapped out an animal-based protein, say they're not eating chicken anymore, they haven't replaced that with
so you have to replace it. Yeah.
So it needs to be replaced. Easy to do, still easy to meet your protein needs on a plant-based diet. It's just you have to know kind of what do you like. Do you like tofu, right? So that's a great replacement for chicken. Also like extremely less expensive.
Totally.
Like so easy to
I love tofu.
Me too.
Yeah.
I eat all the time.
And it doesn't have to be gross.
No.
I just fry it up with some peri-peri sauce. It's so good.
And it's so easy. Like you don't have to worry like, is it undercooked? Like,
yeah,
what's going on?
Exactly. Yeah.
But it really is like all of our evidence is eat more plants. When we're eating a higher plant-based diet, we're eating more fiber. So better for our digestive tract, better for our colon, better for our cholesterol levels too. So the more animal-based products that we're eating, potentially the more saturated fat we're getting. So saturated fat is what is leading to elevated cholesterol levels. And so all of those things kind of come around to adding more fiber into the diet, adding more plants into the diet. So anywhere where you can have more plants, the better. It doesn't have to be 100%, but maybe swapping out, doing a meatless Monday or whatever it is, right? Yeah. It doesn't have to be 100%.
I love that. I also think like we somewhere along the way we became so rigid. Like if you're vegetarian, then you're just a vegetarian. Like you don't eat any animal proteins, or if you are not vegetarian, then it's almost like, oh, those vegetarian people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And listen, I'm married to an Albertan, so we are well represented in our house for our food preferences. But I do love the idea that you can sort of be hybrid.
Yeah.
I've started to just allow myself to be like part-time vegetarian, which means that some days I don't eat meat at all. Yeah. And maybe on the weekend or what have you, introducing a little bit. But again, just being mindful, being at that age where I want to make sure that I'm getting enough protein and replacing animal protein with something alternative.
Yeah.
Super important. Oh my gosh. I'm being told we're getting to time and wrapping up. This has been such a great conversation. I kind of want to switch gears and just a little bit about you.
Okay.
Because people relate to people, and I know that we bring a lot of clinicians into this seat and we talk about healthcare from a very sort of analytical perspective, but at the end of the day, it's people helping people. So I want to know about you, like what areas of your health, when we talk about being wealthy, like it's the Wealthy podcast, we talk about being wealthy, it's sort of all components of health, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, our sense of community, all of that. What areas of your life or health do you feel abundant? So like wealthy, if health is wealth, where do you feel wealthy?
I mean, I think I have a benefit because of my profession too. So I'm like very wealthy for my like nutrition knowledge and being able to have that as my well-being, right? And so because of my career choice, I get that knowledge and knowing what my body needs, what I should be fueling with to be able to kind of live my best life, have that longevity. I mean, you're privileged that you can move your body. And so I take advantage of that. I'm a very active person and know kind of, how that's going to serve me for mobility and flexibility in later life, right? Aging is such a privilege. And so it's really good to kind of be able to utilize what I know and what I'm passionate about to be able to project that onto my life and my family too, right? And so we have that little insider.
So lucky. What areas of your own health are you curious about or working on?
I mean, from a personal perspective, I'm very much working on, laying down muscle mass. Yeah. So I turned 40 this year.
What?
And so I'm very, I think, aware of the importance of that, or I've always been aware of the importance of, strength training and having muscle mass. But I think, I don't know, the switch flipped when I turned 40 and was like, oh yeah, I'm very much in that realm right now. Doing all of the fitness type things and pairing higher protein with that to help support that and acknowledging the importance of rest as well in the day, in between workouts, in between, work hours too, and kind of taking breaks from that. At the beginning of the year, one of my resolutions was to disconnect, and meaning not being so accessible to people.
Interesting.
And so my little thing was I used to wear an Apple Watch. And so, I was accessible all the time. Every text, every email, every notification. And so I'm, always looking at the watch and like, okay, I'll get to that text. And I felt this like innate sense of freedom taking that off.
Wow.
Of like, you know what? My phone's on Do Not Disturb right now. If it's really important, they'll get me. If it's a simple text, I don't need to be notified of that, every waking hour of the day. Mm-hmm. So that was a big one for me.
Wow.
And so I love it.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
I can't even, like, I'm so, it's such an attachment for me.
It was though, like you're sitting at dinner and your wrist is vibrating.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I don't need to have that right now. Or, I just don't need to always be, I'm in the middle of a workout.
Yeah.
And my phone is dinging at me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't need it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was this like sense of freedom and like felt immediately, which I like love. Yeah.
Well, congratulations. That is awesome. And it may be, kind of partially the answer to this last question that I have for you. So what is a meditation or intention that you are working on in your life right now, either professionally or personally? But, like what is the mantra? Like what is keeping you grounded? What are you focusing on? One of them for me is especially in June when it's super busy. I'm a mom, I've got work, all of these things, is like be where your feet are. So just be present.
Yeah.
Like what is do you have a meditation or intention you're working with?
Yeah, I would echo that. That's the same thing, like being more present, not being distracted, and that disconnect. So starting my practice and starting my business, I was always on. Someone's emailing me at 7:30 p.m., I'm responding. And so now I'm taking a step back from that and, kind of setting boundaries and respecting my personal boundaries, right? And with that, and so I think that's a big thing, is just my time. Your time is your biggest commodity, right? And it's our most important commodity. And so utilizing that to things that I enjoy, things that are benefiting like me and my family, and just being present. I think we're so distracted, we're so busy, and for what?
Yeah. Yeah, for what?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Life is short.
Yeah.
And sweet.
Is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Oh
Kristy. This
Thanks
was
for having
such an
me.
amazing conversation. I still have tons of questions that I want to ask you, so maybe we'll have to have you back.
Oh, I would love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.